All right, guys. So President Joe Biden's age is increasingly becoming a pretty significant issue for him. Not just in his ability to be the president for the next 5 years, which is what he's attempting to do by running for re-election right now, but also politically, it's going to be an issue. A vast majority of the American people think that he's simply too old to be the president. And it's not just, the specific age number itself. It's that you can go back and you can look at how Joe Biden was 10, 15 years ago. The man has been in politics for decades and decades and decades. And you can compare his mental acuity, his cognitive abilities from just about a decade ago and compare it to now. There's clearly been a drop-off. I think anybody who is denying that at this point is utterly delusional. Democrats are still forcing through Joe Biden as their nominee. It seems like there's not going to be a break in that. And so he's risking losing the election with this being the major issue that is affecting him. And it's something that he can't even necessarily control, right? It's not some necessarily policy issue or this and that. It is his age. It is his mental incompetence that the American people feel is very obvious right now. And so it's an absolute disaster. And adding on to that, just a couple days ago, we got this special counsel report that was dropped by Robert Hur, who is basically leading the investigation into Joe Biden's handling or mishandling of classified documents. And in this report, as we're going to get to here, he basically says that one of the major reasons why they couldn't bring charges against Joe Biden is that a jury would think that he is too mentally incompetent, that he is too senile to be able to convict for willful retention of these classified documents. And so let's go ahead and get into some of the details here. First on just the basics, right? They say in this report that Biden willfully retained marked and unmarked classified documents at his home in Delaware, risked serious damage to America's national security. Personally, I don't really give a shit about these classified documents or whatever. I think a lot more documents that are classified should probably be unclassified because, the U.S. government loves to classify everything under the sun, especially things that could possibly make them look bad. But anyways, they say there are tapes from back in 2017 where Biden was basically telling a ghostwriter who was writing a book about him that he found all the classified stuff downstairs at his Delaware home. These documents were later found by the feds, and this shows evidence, according to her, that Biden willfully retained the marked documents about Afghanistan, right? And so they get into a couple more details about that. But I'm going to skip down here to where we get to the cognitive ability aspect of this. So they say Biden's serious cognitive issues are exposed. Quote, he did not remember when he was vice president. He forgot when his term began as the vice president. He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. Okay, so this is basically, there are two different things going on here. One are the interviews that he did with this ghostwriter back in 2017. And then there's this interview that he did recently back in October of 2023, where he was doing this interview with the special counsel to talk about the classified documents situation. And so this is referring to that interview that he did back in 2023. So they say, in his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended, saying, quote, if it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president? And forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began, quote, in 2009, am I still the vice president? He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died, and his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Okay? So, obviously, I can't verify this. This is the official report they put out there, so I feel like it's pretty reputable, right? Not remembering when his son died. This stuff is even more egregious. Not remembering when his term began. It's saying, in 2009, am I still vice president? So is he confused? Did he think in 2009 that was after the Obama administration or that it was before Obama and him had taken office? Saying that if in 2013, when did I stop being vice president? You're several years off there, right? I graduated high school back in 2017, right? 2017, 2018. That would be like me thinking back to my high school days and being like, when did I graduate high school? Oh, 2012, 2013, 2014. It's not something that is very easy to forget, okay, if you are mentally competent, especially given that it wasn't that long ago. We're not talking about him being the vice president back in the 1970s and he forgot. We're talking about within the last couple of decades here, within the last decade, that the Obama administration, including Joe Biden, left office. And he's forgetting when his term ended, right? And so then they say that Hur would decline to press charges against Biden for a number of different reasons, saying a jury would likely not convict. Biden is too old to prosecute because whenever this trial would end up playing out, he's well into his 80s, and that a jury could believe that he did not willfully retain the documents because they would see him as an elderly man with a poor memory. So here you have like the DOJ, here you have this special prosecutor basically saying that they are not going to bring official charges against Biden because it would be impossible for a jury to prosecute him, not just because of the substance of the case, which I do think there's a massive difference between what Biden did with classified documents and what Trump did. Trump's is much more egregious, obviously, but they're basically saying we couldn't get a jury to prosecute him because they would see him as like this doddering old man who has a bad memory and is sympathetic because of his senility, essentially, because he's senile. This is the president of the United States of America. This is the most powerful man in the world. Okay, and I've talked about this numerous times on my channel. I've had family members who've had dementia, who've had Alzheimer's. It's horrible. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Okay, but this is the most powerful position in the entire world. So to even have a conversation about this, or that this is a serious issue that we are dealing with right now, and that he is choosing to run for re-election, and that the people around him are allowing him to run for re-election, is utterly insane. We are basically approaching at this point like almost Dianne Feinstein levels, where you need some external force to step in. Because I don't know that Joe Biden is mentally capable of even recognizing his own mental decline at this point. And so then he went out and he did this whole press conference here, where he was, after this report, later on in the day, he did like this impromptu press conference. He's battling it out with reporters the whole time, yelling back and forth about how he's not too old, he's not senile, anything like that. And so let's just go ahead and watch one of these clips here real quick.
For months when you were asked about your age, you would respond with the words, "Watch me." Many American people have been watching, and they have expressed concerns about your age.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. That is not the judgment of the press.
They expressed concerns about your mental acuity. They say that you are too old. Mr. President, in December, you told me that you believe there are many other Democrats who could defeat Donald Trump. So why does it have to be you now? What is your answer to that question?
Because I'm the most qualified person in this country to be president of the United States and finish the job I started.
Okay, so first off, saying that is your judgment as if this is like the personal opinion of that singular reporter is just delusional. I mean, this just dropped today. There's a new ABC News Ipsos poll showing that 86% of Americans surveyed think Joe Biden is too old to serve another term. 86%. So to turn around and get mad at this reporter for asking that question and then saying that's your judgment, it's like, no, that's the judgment of an overwhelming majority of the American people. There's almost nothing that you could poll the American people on where there's going to be 86% agreement. I mean, a majority of Democrats wanted somebody else other than Joe Biden to run for 2024. A majority of Democrats think he's too old to run for re-election. And he's just in denial about this, thinking, and I've seen many other liberals as well defending him, basically pushing the idea that this is some sort of like a right-wing conspiracy, that Joe Biden's mental capabilities have been diminished over the last number of years, that this is a right-wing talking point that is being brought up. I mean, it's delusional. If this is a right-wing talking point, then you're essentially saying almost 90% of the American people are under this sort of like right-wing spin job delusion that Joe Biden is too old or that he's mentally not all there at this point. I mean, Jesus Christ. And there was another clip that came out from the same press conference where he was going back with a reporter and it was incredibly awkward and the reporter was asking him questions about his mental capability and Joe Biden basically responded by saying something like, you know, I'm so mentally with it that I just let you ask that question, and it was just very uncomfortable, wasn't really like a snappy comeback, didn't make any sense given the response. And so we continue here, right? A couple more examples. Just recently, in his second mix-up this week, Biden talks about meeting dead European leaders. He referred to Francois Mitterrand, who died in 1996 instead of French President Emmanuel Macron, and then the late Helmut Kohl instead of former German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Okay? I mean, I guess we've all been there, right? We all get confused and we refer to people that we knew 3 decades ago who are now dead and have been dead for 2 decades, and we get confused and we confuse them with our current friends. I mean, guys, this is utterly ridiculous. Right? I mean, this is like when you get up to a certain age, when you start to lose it, and then maybe your recent memory is not tracking as well, but you have flashbacks to older people that you knew at previous stages of your life that are more ingrained in your memory. I've seen this before, where a lot of the people who I knew, you know, when my grandparents were going through what they were going through, and, you know, you go and you visit people at these homes and you talk to people. You know, my grandma personally she had a much better recollection of some of her friends from like 40 years ago, but couldn't remember what she ate for breakfast that morning. Or in some cases couldn't remember like my girlfriend who she had met previously who I'd been with, right? So you can't remember newer things in your life, but you can remember things from sometimes decades ago. Sometimes that's how this plays out with dementia. And it looks like that's kind of what happened here. It didn't just happen once. It wasn't a verbal slip up. The names aren't really similar here at all. It was just a senior moment, you know? And again, if he's a personal, civilian, then nothing but sympathy. But you're the president of the fucking United States of America, and you're trying to force yourself to run for re-election right now when an overwhelming majority of your own party doesn't think that you should run again. And you're doing shit like this. I mean, Helmut Kohl instead of Angela Merkel. Oh, I guess the names are somewhat German sounding, so everybody makes that mistake, right? We also had this that I covered on the channel. Biden forgot the word Hamas during one of his recent speeches where he was giving an update on a potential for a ceasefire negotiation that was ongoing. He just forgot the word Hamas. Somebody in the audience had to yell out Hamas. And then he said, right, Hamas. He said the opposition instead of remembering the word Hamas. So, I mean, this has been happening over and over and over again. And meanwhile, he has been refusing for, almost the entirety of his administration to do like sit down long form interviews and to take challenging, interviews. He does some of those press conferences, but usually doesn't come off great in those press conferences. But I mean, this is just a recent example of that, right? In terms of like the political failures from the Biden administration, Biden campaign says he made the right choice to skip Super Bowl interviews. So there was an opportunity here for Joe Biden today. The Super Bowl is going to happen today. He had the opportunity to do like an early Super Bowl day interview that would have been seen by potentially millions and millions of Americans. He chose not to do it. Why? Because I think he's not confident in that kind of a setting. Same reason he refuses to do debates, right? This is why he has not debated any of his Democratic primary opponents. It's because he can't. I mean, let's be real about it. He can't. He does not have the ability to do that. Okay? And so he didn't feel confident in doing this Super Bowl interview. I mean, this is an easy layup here, guys. This is not some challenging thing for somebody who's trying to be the president. But they chose not to do this. But you're somehow convinced that you can run a re-election campaign. And then, to put a little bit of icing on the cake here, we also had this from the same exact press conference, where he actually left the stage. He took a couple of questions. He did okay in those questions. He was battling it out with the reporters. He left the stage. Somebody asked another question. He came back to the microphone to answer this question about Israel. And let's just go ahead and watch this.
The conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Okay, so first off, man, he looks like he's about to fall asleep. Okay, he looks like he's about to fall asleep on the table right there. Then he calls Sisi the president of Mexico in a press conference that he decided to do, to go out of his way, an impromptu press conference where he's trying to demonstrate that he has not had any sort of diminishing of his cognitive abilities. And he goes out and calls Sisi the president of Mexico. Guys, Sisi is not the president of Mexico. Okay, he's president of Egypt, right? And you can kind of piece it together in context, right? He's talking about opening up the Rafah border with Egypt to get some more humanitarian supplies in there, whatever the case may be. You can piece it together. But I mean, not exactly good timing there, to say the least, right? Now, to be fair, I do also want to mention this, because it's not just Joe Biden who has these mental slip-ups. His have been very egregious. And the reality is that with somebody like Donald Trump, who also has tons of these similar slip-ups here, and it has for the entirety of his political career, the reality is that Trump has this charismatic ability to just steamroll through whatever bizarre, incoherent statements that he puts out there, or whatever fuck-ups that he has when he's giving one of these rallies or speeches or interviews. And he has this ability to sort of like adjust on the fly and keep it sort of like charismatic and entertaining and just brush past it as if it's not a big deal. Biden comes across a lot more like he's about to pass out on the desk. And so Trump recently, I mean, almost on the same exact day, I think it was, said a similar thing. He said, Viktor Orban, he's the leader of Turkey. So I guess he meant to say Erdogan, or maybe he meant to talk about Hungary. I don't really know what exactly his message was here. I didn't get the context of this broader clip. So I don't know if he was talking about Hungary and he misspoke with the word Turkey, or if he was trying to talk about Turkey and he misspoke with Viktor Orban instead of Erdogan. I don't know. But he did the same shit on like the same day. And as pointed out here, this following up the Biden-Sisi incident, I guess this was within an hour, might just be the most 2024 election thing in existence. And so, yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, this is where we're at right now in this country, where we have two guys who are arguably both at least senile at this point, both in their 80s, right? I mean, Donald Trump is in his 80s as well, I believe, if not approaching that rapidly. And this is just like the two main options that the American people get. I mean, it's just a sick joke. This is the best that we can do. The wealthiest country in the history of humanity, the most powerful country on earth. These are the two best people that we can offer, apparently, out of a country of 330 million some odd people. Okay? And we're stuck with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It is just as depressing as you could possibly imagine. Now, we also had another slip up here by Fox News, who were basically in the midst of making fun of Biden for his mental slip-ups. And apparently Jesse Watter then welcomed on South Carolina Governor Kristi Noem, who was, of course, the governor of South Dakota. Okay, so everybody's fucking up. Apparently nobody in this country, in the media, in the political realm, knows what the fuck is going on. We're all just freeballing out here. We're all just coming up with names and states and countries on the fly. You know, I don't even know what to say at this point, honestly. And so at the same time, we also had this, right? Maryan Williamson just dropped out a couple days ago from the Democratic primary race. Now, I mean, this is depressing for a number of different reasons. I certainly think that she made some mistakes. I didn't cover it real tightly on this channel, but I do think she made some mistakes during her candidacy. But at the same time, it's like, you know, how much are you expected to do? How far can you possibly get in a primary that is effectively rigged from the beginning? Okay, both rigged from the Democratic Party and rigged from the media. For the Democratic Party, I mean, they weren't allowing her, or Dean Phillips for that matter, or Cenk Uygur as well, to get on certain ballots. They would change the date of the registration for certain state ballots, like randomly without warning anybody, and then they said, oh, you're too late to register for this ballot. You know, Maryan Williamson was blocked from giving speeches or holding rallies at like certain college Democrat groups because the DNC would block those. You know, so you had, the moving of the states of South Carolina is now going to be the first state, and we're pretending as if New Hampshire doesn't even exist, as their vote count doesn't really exist, and they had to do this write-in campaign. So there was so much rigging from the Democratic Party, the refusal to do debates. I mean, we could talk about it endlessly. It was obviously rigged from the beginning, from the DNC's perspective. It was also rigged from the beginning from the media perspective, because they never gave her, or Dean Phillips for that matter, a fair shot. I mean, the first time I saw a recent interview with Dean Phillips, and it was after he got wiped out in South Carolina. And it's like, you never brought him on to talk about his platform, right? You never gave Maryan Williamson or Dean Phillips a fair shake. You never told the American people in an honest way there is another choice out there. You don't have to go with Joe Biden. In fact, you were doing the opposite the entire time, pretending as if Maryan, Dean Phillips are both total jokes who don't deserve to get a fair hearing, that Joe Biden is already decidedly going to be the next nominee. There's no conversation about it. And so that's how the media treated this entire campaign. And it's almost worse in a sense, and Kyle Kulinski's made this point a bunch, it's almost worse when the media doesn't talk about you at all, and when they just ignore you and there's a total blackout, than it would be if they were actively attacking you all the time. Because then at least your name is being brought up, and then people can hear about you, they can go and look further into you, you have a little bit more name recognition. But this round, it wasn't even just smears, it was just a total blackout. They just pretended as if the Democratic primary didn't exist. And so now we're stuck with Joe Biden as presumptively the nominee. I mean, at this point, the only hope is that either, number one, he dies in the next month or so, because it's really, it's crunch time right now. We got the election coming up in November. It's only, 6-7 months away or whatever at this point. So we're kind of stuck with Joe Biden unless he dies, or unless there is some sort of like a miraculous Democratic Party play for him to resign and then hand it off to God, who knows who. Right? Maybe it's Kamala Harris, maybe it's Pete Buttigieg, maybe they rapidly open up the primary and then Gavin Newsom throws his hat in the ring. I don't know at this point. But if Joe Biden keeps himself in this running, he keeps making mental lapses like we just saw in those numerous clips there, picking fights with the media, pretending as if it's not a problem at all, that an overwhelming majority, almost 90% of the American people, believe that he's too old to run for office. I mean, if he stays on this current trajectory, that could be the main factor that allows Trump to get reelected, which is also deeply ironic because many Democrats, right, and I honestly agree with this to some extent, constantly talk about how Republicans and Trump himself are the greatest threat to American democracy that has ever existed in modern history. And yet you are choosing to risk American democracy on the backs of what is historically a weak candidate. Okay, Joe Biden's approval rating right now is hovering at around 38%. There has never been, in the modern history of America, a president who has run and won their re-election bid with that low of an approval rating. In fact, there has never even been a president in the modern history of the United States who has even run a campaign for re-election with that low of an approval rating. So he is historically unpopular. He's in the midst with his endless support for Israel and Gaza, in the midst of destroying some of his key constituencies of young people and Arab Americans in key swing states like Michigan that I've talked about extensively on this channel. And this is just going to become a bigger and a bigger issue. And so here's the Democratic Party for you. You know, pretending as if there's no democratic process, eviscerating democracy within your own party platform, and then continuing to force Joe Biden, a deeply unpopular candidate who a vast majority of Americans and Democrats don't want to run for re-election, forcing him to stay as your party leader and potentially risking the entire country on the backs of him.